How many of you are familiar with the term agronomics? If you go by the Wikipedia definition, agronomy is the science and technology of producing and using plants in agriculture for food, fuel, fiber, recreation, and land restoration. Agronomy has become to encompass work in the areas of plant genetics, plant physiology, meteorology, and soil science. It is the application of a combination of sciences like biology, chemistry, economics, ecology, earth science, and genetics. Professionals in the field of agronomy are called agronomists. Now remember that term because I am going to mention it again in a moment. Today I want to discuss something that is not only a subject of pop culture and sci-fi horror, it is also a real concern for those who consider a zombie apocalypse or something like it to be a real threat to the future of mankind. And I get it. As much as zombies are discussed and used as entertainment, it does seem that with our advancements in biotechnology and the growth of the idea, accidents happen, and some things are done deliberately. So there exists this possibility that something in the lines of a zombie apocalypse could occur. But how? So today, we explore some of the science and truth behind this. The truth always seems to be a bit stranger than fiction, composed of parts that we didn't consider. Given what has just occurred on our planet, it is more likely people would infect themselves, a man-made scenario more than natural. The effects of something manufactured. But things are not always what they seem, and what we have seen rendered in film and books may be a mild rendition of what would actually occur. Who knows? We may have already been given the warning sign. So, some time ago, I uploaded a presentation on warning signs, and I talked a little about a movie released in 1985 entitled Warning Sign. And the reason I bring it up now is because I want to point out a few things that are in this movie. If you have not seen it, you may want to do that before watching this because I will spoil it. Now, the first thing to note about this film is the time period in which it was made. 1985 was some years ago, wasn't it? The film opens up with an airplane spraying a field of crops with what we can only assume is a pesticide or herbicide. The setting for this film is a laboratory, biotech agronomics. Now, when I say that, knowing what agronomics is, that doesn't seem like they would be working with anything dangerous, now does it? Well, at this particular lab in the movie, they are working with something dangerous. And they make it very clear that this is the case by showing us the procedure for entering the lab room, the P4 lab. In this lab, there is a sealed biohazard working area where technicians can work on biological agents, or in this case, biological weapons. Now, you can't walk in there with a surgical mask on. Forget about it. Even though they are telling us they work in our imaginary world, in the real world, they don't. First, you have to suit up in a hazmat suit, specifically designed and made for this type of lab. It can't be any old Tyvek suit. The wrist and the ankles have to be sealed off tight, as well as the headgear. Before one can enter this pressurized lab, after you are all suited up, you enter an ultraviolet sterilization chamber, which gives off a few flashes of UV light to sterilize your suit. Inside the lab room, there are lines that feed oxygen. The suits have to be airtight. Any airborne agent can infect anyone who comes in contact with the air that is in that room. In this case, the guy who had just entered the room has entered a room where one of the agents is in a test tube rolling around on the floor freely, without anyone noticing. He stops to take a picture of the staff working on this new biological agent, and for some dumb reason, they all lift their face coverings just to take a better picture. And of course, our photographer steps on and crushes the test tube containing the deadly agent. Upon exiting the lab room, one has to shower off the suit with a disinfectant. One of the problems, however, is you still cannot make contact with the outside of the suit after it is removed. And what does this guy do? He sticks his still gloved finger in his eye, playing around with his contact lens, getting that biological agent all up in his contact lens. Shortly after this occurs, before any of the technicians had any clue of what had happened, a biohazard alarm goes off, alerting security to activate Protocol 1. Now, how in the world did that happen? What measures were in place to detect an agent and sound off an alarm when something like that is released? Well, it's called an autonomous detection system, which monitors the air for airborne chemicals, toxins, pathogens, and other biological agents capable of causing human illness or death. They made a movie showing this in the 80s, so what in the world happened at the Wuhan lab? What detection system was in place over there? You know, folks, a lot of these labs that do work on biological weapons and deadly viruses, they keep those lab rooms deep underground. So any release of those agents helps them stay underground. After all the alarms go off and the building starts to automatically seal itself off, we can see one of the idiot technicians attempting to escape the lockdown, knowing very well what agents she was working with in the lab. It is very telling about the mentality of humans, even when they are professionals responsible for keeping deadly agents contained. Now, once Protocol 1 was activated by security that locked down the entire building so no one could get out, one of the scientists realized that one of the ventilation pumps, I guess, was down. And once they started it back up, the scientists figured out that that was the issue and a biohazard was a false alarm. However, security cannot reach any outside assistance, and the scientist tells her that the phone lines were cut the moment she turned the switch, which he said that he would explain to her later. And of course, we all know that could only mean one thing. First, the lab animals started going crazy and began to attack each other. So the scientists shot the animals and cremated the remains. In the lab room, the head scientist prepares an injection for each of the staff as part of Protocol 1. One of the scientists says, "You have no right to experiment on these people," and the head scientist says, "This is not an experiment, it's Protocol 1. Do you want to go to Protocol 2? Which I believe is letting the agent or infection run its course. So he also uses a imaging black light device to detect what he calls lactobacillus luminescens, which is what would be used to track the bioagent in vivo in lab animals. So using that lamp, they would be able to see the gene expression of the contamination or infection. In this case, the agent had worked its way into the sweat glands, which would glow under this light. So, what type of bioagent was released? One of the reasons I am going over all of this is because it is not too far off from what would happen in real life. For example, once the idiot townsfolk find out that the lab is locked down with their family members inside, they of course try to break into the lab. And this is why the phone lines were cut. You can't tell people anything. They don't know how to respond rationally. One or two idiots is all it takes to unleash something like that upon us all. But to give them credit, they of course were told a lie. One funny scene which is also very interesting is that once the authorities found out that our escaped technician was in the lab along with two other people, they immediately stick her whole body in a plastic bag. Yet for some reason in the 80s, they were just paranoid, I guess. Dr. Fauci should have told them all that all they needed was a surgical mask or a scarf. This is how these things work. They don't work the way they have been telling us over the past year or so. This is how serious an outbreak should be treated, even before anyone knows what was released. Remember, I said that the name of this facility was Biotech Agronomics. Well, everyone outside of that lab thinks that they were experimenting with GMO technology for farming. But in reality, they were working on a bioweapon and told the public that what was accidentally released was an experimental yeast. And they locked the building down to prevent food crops in the area from being contaminated. Pretty good cover up, right? They covered up one bad thing with something that was still bad, but not as bad. Think about that whenever the government tries to convince you of something. What's funny is while this guy is giving this little speech of how not to worry, a truck full of armed soldiers arrives to the facility. Now that is some serious yeast. I think this guy works for the CDC. I mean, security was under the impression that they were just working on genetically modified plants. They use compartmentalization a lot in this film. There were two groups of scientists and a bunch in the cafeteria. The ones in the lab room were all passed out. The ones who appeared not to be infected were locked in another part of the building by the security office. Before any of those people showed a sign of infection, they suddenly became violently aggressive. They axed their way into the security office because she wouldn't let them out. Then they threw an axe at her head. The zombies are now active. And that is just the beginning of the illness. Those who have seen this film know that it gets pretty wild from this point on. This bioweapon effectively turns anyone infected into a murderous psychopath, a living, breathing, thinking zombie of the worst kind. Forget about getting bitten. We're talking about zombies that use weapons and psychology. See, we don't need to be facing zombies that can ambush you like this. The bug was designed to cause confusion. It would cause soldiers to turn on each other, rage, and then death. You see, a biological weapon doesn't spread like a virus. It's more like spreading poison. So even if everyone is not affected by the agent itself, they can still be affected by the people who are infected with this agent. In the movie, this would be considered a deadly airborne toxin. One of the doctors that enters the building in a rescue attempt tells the story of the town of Borna in Saxony, Germany, where some horses caught a bug that enraged them, a Borna virus that could affect the rhinocephalon, a portion of the brain that gives you a sense of smell and is associated with emotional behavior, rage, aggression, and hypersexuality. You guys can look into this. It is real. The coronavirus is hard to catch, though. So in the movie, they took the most dangerous part of that virus and put it into a contagious bacteria vector, chimeric gene splicing, which is a real thing. Now, this film does have a happy ending where they discover the antitoxin and save the day before the sun came up. And everybody who was once infected got to leave the building and go home. Unfortunately, in the real world, it probably wouldn't have such an ending. Now, I do want to discuss the recent zombie preparedness campaign brought about by the CDC, but that is going to be in an extension or a part 2 of this presentation, which will only be available to see on woodwardentertainment.com. Everything there you can see for free. Also, the experiment episode 2 is now available to view on the website as well. Until next time, folks, stay tuned. There is more to come, more madness to report. Look out for those warning signs and remember to stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.